$100 can solve a small problem. 200 can buy a convincing lie, but neither is enough to prepare you for the truth hiding behind a stranger's smile. Alicia Carter counted the worn $20 bills for the third time as she sat alone on a weathered bench outside a neighborhood coffee shop on the east side of Chicago. The crisp October breeze carried the scent of roasted coffee and fallen maple leaves through the quiet street, while the late afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the sidewalk. $200. That was everything she had managed to save after paying rent on her tiny apartment, sending money to her grandmother in Georgia, and covering another week of bus fare to the mansion, where she spent every day polishing marble floors that reflected chandeliers worth more than she would earn in a lifetime. She stared at the handwritten note she had posted online only an hour earlier. Need someone to pretend to be my boyfriend for one afternoon. Family reunion. Pays $200. Must be respectful. It sounded ridiculous even to her. 6 months earlier, during a holiday phone call, Alicia had made one harmless lie to stop her relatives from asking why she was still single, still cleaning houses, and still sacrificing every dream she once carried. She had smiled through the call and casually mentioned she had met someone wonderful. The lie spread faster than she could stop it. Her cousins wanted pictures. Her aunt wanted wedding plans. Her grandmother thanked God every Sunday for sending a good man into Alicia's life. Now the annual family reunion was only 2 days away, and every excuse had finally run out. She could either confess that she had lied to everyone she loved or find a stranger willing to play along for a few hours. She never expected anyone to answer so quickly. "Are you Alicia?" a calm voice asked. She looked up and saw an ordinary man standing a few feet away. He wore faded blue jeans, a charcoal jacket, clean white sneakers, and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who never needed to impress anyone. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his steady gray eyes held an unusual calm that made the noisy street seem quieter. "I'm Gabriel," he said with a polite smile. "I think you're looking for a fake boyfriend." Alicia almost laughed from relief. He looked nothing like the actors or influencers she had imagined would mock her request. He looked dependable, ordinary, safe. "You really came?" she asked, standing quickly. "You don't think it's weird?" Gabriel glanced toward the busy intersection where strangers hurried home without noticing either of them. "People do unusual things for family," he replied. "Sometimes the smallest lies are told to protect the people we love." His answer caught her off guard. It sounded less like a guess and more like someone speaking from experience. She handed him the folded cash before she could lose her nerve. "Half now, half after Saturday," she said. Gabriel accepted the money without counting it, slipping the bills into his jacket pocket with almost no interest. For just a brief second, a black luxury SUV rolled silently past the corner. The driver slowed, watching Gabriel through tinted glass before continuing down the street without stopping. Alicia never noticed. She was too busy explaining the names of her cousins, her grandmother's famous peach cobbler, and the story they would have to memorize before the weekend. Gabriel listened carefully, nodding after every detail as though preparing for the most important role of his life. What Alicia could not possibly know was that the $200 she had just offered meant absolutely nothing to the man standing beside her. Hidden behind his quiet smile was an empire built on secrets, influence, and absolute loyalty. Yet for the first time in years, Gabriel Castellano found himself accepting a role that had nothing to do with power. He had agreed to become someone's ordinary boyfriend, completely unaware that pretending to belong in Alicia's simple world might become the only place where he would finally feel at home. The next morning began before sunrise, just as every workday did for Alicia Carter. The city was still wrapped in pale blue light when she stepped off the bus and walked through the tall iron gates of the Ashford estate, a sprawling mansion tucked behind ancient oak trees on Chicago's northern edge. The polished stone driveway stretched nearly a quarter of a mile before reaching the front entrance, where fountains shimmered beneath carefully trimmed hedges. Alicia had worked there for almost a year, yet the place still felt like another world, one where silence was expensive and perfection was expected. She tied on her apron, greeted the other staff with a warm smile, and immediately began dusting the endless hallway lined with oil paintings and crystal sconces. Her mind should have been focused on work, but instead it kept drifting back to Gabriel. There had been something unusual about him. Not because he was handsome or charming, but But because he never asked unnecessary questions, never negotiated the payment, and never laughed at her awkward situation, most strangers would have. Somehow he simply understood. During her lunch break, she found herself studying the handwritten notes she had made for him. Family names, favorite foods, stories from childhood, little details that would make the act believable. She smiled to herself, imagining how surprised her grandmother would be when Gabriel politely complimented her peach cobbler or remembered every cousin's name. Across town, Gabriel sat alone inside a quiet corner booth of a modest diner, reading Alicia's notes as carefully as though they were confidential legal documents. He memorized birthdays, family traditions, church stories, and childhood memories with astonishing speed. Every now and then, the waitress walked by offering another refill of coffee, but his attention never drifted from the pages. An elderly customer accidentally dropped a cane beside his table, and before anyone else reacted, Gabriel calmly stood, picked it up, and helped the gentleman back into his chair with genuine kindness. The old man thanked him with a grateful smile, unaware that the quiet stranger possessed resources capable of buying the entire block without a second thought. Gabriel simply nodded and returned to his reading. His phone vibrated once. A single message appeared on the screen. The meeting has been moved forward. Everyone is waiting. He looked at the notification for several silent seconds before locking the phone without answering. For the first time in years, something else had earned priority over his schedule. Later that afternoon, Alicia finished her shift and met Gabriel at a quiet public park to continue preparing for Saturday. They walked slowly beneath rows of maple trees as children played nearby and joggers passed with friendly smiles. Gabriel listened as Alicia described every member of her family in remarkable detail. Her grandmother believed every problem could be solved with homemade pie. Her youngest cousin collected baseball cards. Her uncle loved talking about fishing trips that always grew more unbelievable each year. Gabriel remembered everything effortlessly. Then, almost casually, he asked, "What makes you happiest?" Alicia looked surprised by the question. She laughed softly before answering, "Having everyone I love together at one table." Gabriel looked ahead without speaking. It was such a simple answer, yet it carried a kind of wealth he had never measured before. As they reached the parking lot, Alicia noticed an expensive black sedan waiting nearby. A sharply dressed man stepped out, glanced toward Gabriel, then respectfully lowered his head before quietly returning to the driver's seat without saying a single word. Gabriel pretended not to notice. Alicia assumed he had mistaken Gabriel for someone else. She shrugged off the strange encounter and continued talking about the family reunion. But as the sedan disappeared into evening traffic, Gabriel understood something that Alicia did not. The walls separating his hidden life from her ordinary world were already beginning to crack, and keeping those worlds apart was becoming far more difficult than he had expected. Saturday arrived wrapped in bright autumn sunlight, the kind that turned every tree into a painting of crimson, amber, and gold. Alicia stood outside her apartment building, smoothing the sleeves of her simple navy blue dress for what felt like the 10th time. She checked her reflection in the glass entrance door and sighed. Nothing about her looked extraordinary, yet today she carried the weight of an entire story on her shoulders. At exactly 10 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled quietly to the curb. Gabriel stepped out wearing a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. He looked elegant without appearing flashy, confident without demanding attention. Alicia blinked in surprise. The man she had met 2 days earlier seemed almost transformed, yet there was still something effortlessly natural about him. "You clean up pretty well," she said with an embarrassed laugh. Gabriel smiled warmly. "I could say the same thing." During the 90-minute drive toward the small Illinois town where her family gathered every year, they rehearsed the details one final time. They laughed over imaginary stories about how they had supposedly met in a grocery store after reaching for the same loaf of bread. Gabriel remembered every tiny detail flawlessly, even correcting Alicia once when she accidentally changed the month of their fictional first date. His memory amazed her. "You have a gift," she admitted. "I have learned that listening carefully is more valuable than speaking often," he replied. The answer lingered in Alicia's thoughts long after the conversation moved on. When they stopped at a small roadside bakery, Gabriel quietly purchased 2 fresh apple pies because he remembered Alicia mentioning that her grandmother always worried there would not be enough dessert for unexpected guests. Alicia watched him carry the warm boxes with both hands, as though they were something precious instead of inexpensive pastries. She had expected someone pretending for money. Instead, Gabriel behaved like someone who genuinely cared about making her family happy. As they continued driving, Alicia noticed another strange detail. At nearly every stoplight, someone seemed to recognize Gabriel. A businessman tipped his hat with quiet respect. An elderly woman smiled warmly as though greeting an old friend. Even a police officer directing traffic nodded politely before waving their car through without hesitation. Gabriel acknowledged each person with the same calm courtesy, never lingering long enough for Alicia to question it. She simply assumed he had once lived somewhere nearby or possessed one of those unforgettable faces people naturally trusted. By early afternoon, they reached the modest community center where generations of Alicia's family had gathered for reunions every fall. Pickup trucks filled the parking lot, children chased one another across the grass, and the smell of barbecue drifted through the cool air. Before Alicia could even open her door, her grandmother hurried down the front steps with surprising energy for a woman in her late 70s. Tears immediately filled her eyes. "So this is the young man who finally stole my granddaughter's heart," she said with a joyful smile. Gabriel stepped forward without hesitation, gently taking her hands. "Mrs. Carter, it is an honor to finally meet you. Alicia has told me your peach cobbler is famous." The elderly woman's face lit up with delighted laughter. "Oh my goodness, he remembers things." One by one, the rest of the family surrounded them with hugs, questions, and playful teasing. Gabriel greeted every cousin by name, complimented Alicia's uncle on his restored fishing boat before anyone mentioned it, and even asked her youngest cousin about the baseball card collection that had recently grown by 3 rare editions. Alicia stared in disbelief. Her relatives were completely enchanted, and for the first time in months, she felt the crushing anxiety inside her chest begin to disappear. Yet standing quietly beneath the laughter, Gabriel experienced something entirely different. Watching 3 generations gather around folding tables, hearing children argue over board games while grandparents smiled nearby, he realized he had entered a world untouched by status, influence, or hidden power. It was ordinary in every possible way, and somehow that ordinary life felt more extraordinary than anything he had ever known. The afternoon unfolded with the comfortable rhythm that only family gatherings could create. Folding tables overflowed with homemade dishes, children chased footballs across the open field, and old stories became funnier every time someone told them again. Alicia had expected to spend the entire day nervously protecting her secret, but instead she found herself watching Gabriel fit naturally into moments that could never have been rehearsed. He helped her uncle carry coolers without being asked, patiently listened as her grandmother described recipes she had memorized decades earlier, and laughed sincerely when her youngest cousin challenged him to a game of horseshoes. Every smile he offered felt effortless, and every conversation seemed to leave people liking him even more. Alicia caught herself studying him from across the picnic tables, wondering how a complete stranger could become so comfortable among people he had met only hours earlier. During lunch, her aunt leaned closer and whispered with an approving smile, "Honey, do not let this one get away. He looks at you like you matter." Alicia nearly dropped her fork. She wanted to explain that none of this was real, that everything around them was built upon a $200 agreement, but the words refused to come. Instead, she glanced toward Gabriel just as he looked back at her. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The silence carried an unexpected warmth that made her quickly look away. Later that afternoon, her grandfather invited Gabriel to sit beside him beneath the shade of an old maple tree. The elderly man had spent more than 50 years repairing engines before retiring, and he rarely opened up to strangers. Yet somehow, within minutes, he was sharing stories about raising a family during difficult times and learning that success had little to do with money. Gabriel listened with complete attention, never interrupting, never checking his phone, simply allowing the older man to finish every thought. When the conversation ended, her grandfather squeezed Gabriel's shoulder and quietly said, "Take care of my granddaughter. She has spent her whole life taking care of everyone else." Gabriel answered without hesitation, "I know." Alicia overheard those 2 simple words from several yards away, and something inside her shifted. He should not have known that. She had never told him how many extra shifts she worked, how many birthdays she quietly skipped to afford gifts for others, or how often she placed everyone else's happiness before her own. Somehow, he had noticed anyway. As the sun slowly drifted lower across the horizon, the family gathered for their traditional group photograph. Everyone squeezed together while children laughed and grandparents called people closer. Gabriel naturally stepped beside Alicia, and without thinking, she reached for his hand just as the camera flashed. Neither of them pulled away immediately afterward. Across the parking lot, however, another moment unfolded unnoticed. A black luxury vehicle rolled silently to a stop beneath a line of tall oak trees. A well-dressed man stepped out, glanced toward the family gathering from a respectful distance, then discreetly approached Gabriel while everyone remained distracted by dessert. "Sir," the man said softly, keeping his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Several important people have arrived early. They are waiting for your decision." Gabriel looked toward Alicia, who was laughing with her cousins while helping her grandmother slice pie. For the first time in many years, he hesitated. "They can wait," he answered calmly. The man appeared surprised, but immediately nodded before returning to the vehicle without another word. Alicia turned just in time to see the elegant car disappearing down the road. "Who was that?" she asked curiously as Gabriel rejoined the family. He smiled with practiced ease. "Someone who thought I was somebody else." She accepted the explanation without another question, but deep inside, a quiet feeling began to grow. Small pieces no longer seemed to fit together. The respectful strangers, the expensive cars, the effortless confidence, and the mysterious interruptions all pointed toward a life Gabriel had never spoken about. She simply had not yet realized how extraordinary that hidden life truly was. The reunion slowly gave way to evening as families packed leftover food into containers and children reluctantly climbed into waiting cars. Alicia and Gabriel stayed behind to help fold tables and stack chairs while her grandmother insisted on wrapping slices of peach cobbler for them to take home. The sky glowed with soft shades of orange and lavender, and the crisp air carried the comforting scent of charcoal and cinnamon. It should have felt like the perfect ending to a simple day, yet Alicia could not shake the quiet questions gathering in the back of her mind. Throughout the afternoon, she had noticed details that no longer seemed like coincidences. Gabriel always seemed to know exactly what to say, no matter who stood before him. Elderly relatives trusted him within minutes. Children followed him naturally. Even strangers who happened to pass by greeted him with unusual respect. It was as though the world quietly recognized him, while she remained the only person who did not. During the drive back toward Chicago, they spoke comfortably about her family, laughing over embarrassing childhood stories and teasing one another about who had played their role more convincingly. Then Gabriel's phone lit up again. This time the screen reflected briefly against the windshield before he turned it over. Alicia caught only a few words. "They are all waiting." She pretended not to notice, but several minutes later another message appeared, followed almost immediately by another. Gabriel never answered any of them. Instead, he asked whether her grandmother always made peach cobbler from scratch or whether the recipe had been passed down through generations. His ability to redirect every conversation was almost effortless. As they entered the city, traffic slowed beneath the bright lights of downtown. At a red light, Alicia noticed a familiar black luxury sport utility vehicle stop one lane behind them. It remained there through 2 intersections before quietly turning onto another street. "I think that same vehicle has been following us since we left town," she said with a nervous laugh. Gabriel glanced briefly into the rearview mirror before smiling calmly. "Probably heading in the same direction." His answer sounded reasonable, yet somehow incomplete. When he parked outside Alicia's apartment building, she reached into her purse and handed him the remaining $100 exactly as they had agreed. Gabriel looked down at the folded bills for several silent seconds before accepting them with the same polite gratitude he had shown 2 days earlier. "Thank you," Alicia said sincerely. "You saved me from one of the most embarrassing days of my life." Gabriel looked at the money in his hand, then back at her. "I think today may have helped me more than it helped you." Before she could ask what he meant, headlights swept across the quiet street. Another elegant sedan rolled to a gentle stop several yards away. A distinguished older gentleman stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored dark overcoat. He approached only far enough to catch Gabriel's attention before respectfully lowering his head. He did not speak loudly. He did not wave. He simply waited with remarkable patience. Alicia watched in puzzled silence. Gabriel sighed almost imperceptibly, then turned back toward her. "I should go." She nodded, although curiosity now outweighed every other emotion. "Do you know him?" she asked. Gabriel paused just long enough to choose his words carefully. "Yes," he answered. "He has worked with me for a very long time." The response sounded truthful, yet strangely incomplete. Alicia smiled politely and wished him a safe drive before walking toward her apartment entrance. Halfway up the front steps, she glanced back one final time. The older gentleman had already opened the rear passenger door, but instead of climbing inside immediately, Gabriel stood for a quiet moment looking toward the warm light shining from Alicia's apartment window. The expression on his face was thoughtful, almost reluctant, as though leaving that ordinary neighborhood required far more effort than entering it had. Moments later, the sedan disappeared into the evening, carrying with it answers Alicia did not yet know she was about to discover. Monday morning arrived with cold rain tapping gently against the mansion windows as Alicia Carter resumed her familiar routine inside the Ashford estate. She polished silver trays, arranged fresh flowers, and moved quietly through rooms that seemed untouched by ordinary life. Yet her thoughts remained somewhere else. Every time she reached for a glass or folded another linen napkin, she found herself remembering Gabriel's patient smile, the way he had listened more than he spoke, and the strange sadness she had noticed in his eyes before he left her apartment. By lunchtime, she convinced herself that the entire weekend had become nothing more than a pleasant memory. Their agreement had ended. He had been paid. Their lives had returned to separate paths. That afternoon, the estate manager handed Alicia a sealed envelope and asked her to deliver it personally to a private conference suite at the Lakeshore Grand Hotel. It was an unusual request, but not unheard of. The estate frequently hosted business meetings throughout the city, and trusted staff members occasionally transported important documents. Alicia placed the envelope carefully into her work bag and boarded the next bus downtown. The hotel lobby shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting elegant guests moving quietly through the afternoon. Alicia approached the reception desk, gave the suite number, and was politely directed toward a private elevator reserved for invited visitors. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she immediately sensed an atmosphere unlike anything she had experienced before. Men and women dressed in impeccably tailored suits stood silently along the corridor. No one spoke above a whisper. Every movement appeared calm, measured, and deliberate. Alicia hesitated, wondering whether she had stepped into the wrong event. Before she could turn back, one of the attendants noticed the estate envelope in her hand and courteously opened a pair of large wooden doors. The conference room beyond overlooked Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows. A long walnut table stretched across the room, surrounded by distinguished guests whose conversations stopped the moment Alicia entered. She lowered her eyes politely, intending only to deliver the envelope and leave as quickly as possible. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. "Thank you for bringing it." Alicia slowly looked up. Standing at the far end of the room was Gabriel. Gone were the casual jacket and relaxed smile she had come to know. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark tie. His posture carried quiet authority, and every person in the room had already risen to their feet before he had spoken a single word. The distinguished gentleman Alicia had seen outside her apartment stood beside him, waiting respectfully. Without hesitation, another executive stepped forward and addressed him. "Mr. Castellano, everyone is ready whenever you are." Alicia felt the air leave her lungs. Castellano. The name echoed through her mind with unsettling familiarity. She watched in stunned silence as each person around the table greeted Gabriel with unmistakable respect. No one interrupted him. No one questioned him. Even the hotel staff waited patiently along the walls until he acknowledged them with a simple nod. Gabriel accepted the envelope from Alicia with the same gentle expression he had worn while carrying apple pies for her grandmother only 2 days earlier. For a brief moment, the powerful businessman before the room disappeared, replaced by the quiet man who had memorized every member of her family simply to protect her from embarrassment. "Alicia," he said softly, "I did not expect to see you here." She searched his face for an explanation that never came. Suddenly, every unusual moment replayed itself with perfect clarity. The luxury vehicles, the respectful strangers, the unanswered messages, the older gentleman who always seemed to wait instead of calling. None of them had been coincidences. They had all been pieces of a truth she had never imagined. The ordinary man she believed she had hired for $200 was never ordinary at all. And as the room remained completely silent around him, Alicia finally understood that she had unknowingly invited one of the most influential men in the city into the simplest and most honest weekend of her life. The silence inside the conference room seemed to stretch far beyond the polished walls and towering windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Alicia stood motionless, the empty envelope still resting lightly in her hands, while every assumption she had made over the past few days quietly unraveled. Gabriel was not simply respected. He was deferred to. Every executive waited for his approval before speaking. Every decision appeared to begin and end with him. Yet, when his eyes met hers, the authority that filled the room softened into the same quiet warmth she remembered from the family reunion. "If you will excuse us for a moment," Gabriel said calmly. No one objected. Several people simply nodded and stepped back, as though his request required no explanation. He guided Alicia into a private terrace overlooking the lake, where the cool breeze carried away the tension neither of them knew how to break. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Alicia looked directly at him. "Why did you never tell me who you really were?" Gabriel rested his hands on the stone railing before answering. "Because you never asked who I was. You only asked whether I could help you." She searched his face, hoping to find some sign that this had all been another performance. Instead, she found only honesty. "You let me hand you $200, she whispered. "You let me believe you needed the money." Gabriel slowly removed his wallet and unfolded the same crisp bill she had given him. They remained perfectly straight, untouched since the day she paid him. "I never needed the money," he admitted quietly. "I kept it because it reminded me that, for one weekend, someone trusted me without caring about my reputation, my influence, or my last name." Alicia felt an unexpected ache settle inside her chest. She had imagined feeling angry after discovering the truth. Instead, she felt confused. "You could have said no," she replied. "Someone in your position had no reason to spend an entire weekend pretending to be part of my family." Gabriel smiled faintly as he looked toward the lake. "Do you remember what your grandfather told me beneath the maple tree?" Alicia nodded. "He asked me to take care of you because you spent your life taking care of everyone else." His voice grew quieter. "No one has ever said something like that to me before." Alicia lowered her eyes. The distance between their worlds suddenly felt impossible to ignore. She cleaned other people's homes for a living. He walked into rooms where everyone stood before he even spoke. "I think we should leave things where they belong," she said softly. "The weekend is over. The agreement ended. We both go back to our real lives." Gabriel did not interrupt her. He simply listened, just as he always had. After a long silence, he reached into his jacket pocket and gently held out the folded $200. "Then let me return this." Alicia looked at the bills but made no move to take them. "Why?" she asked. Gabriel's expression carried neither regret nor pride, only quiet sincerity. "Because this is the only payment I have ever accepted that made me feel ordinary instead of important. It does not belong in my wallet. It belongs to the woman who reminded me what an honest life looks like." Alicia slowly accepted the money with trembling fingers. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them reached for another excuse to stay. When she finally turned toward the elevator, every step felt heavier than the last. Gabriel remained standing on the terrace, watching the doors close without calling her back. For the first time in years, the man who could influence countless lives discovered there was one decision he could not control. Sometimes the greatest distance between two people was not measured in miles or money, but in the belief that they belonged to different worlds. Alicia tried to convince herself that walking away had been the right decision. The following days settled back into familiar routines, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. Every polished mirror inside the Ashford estate reflected the same thoughtful expression she could no longer hide. Every quiet hallway reminded her of conversations that had lasted only a weekend, but somehow changed the way she looked at the world. She kept the folded $200 inside the front pocket of her journal, unable to spend it and unwilling to throw it away. It had become more than money. It had become proof that one extraordinary weekend had actually happened. Meanwhile, Gabriel returned to a schedule filled with meetings, negotiations, and responsibilities that demanded every hour of his attention. Elegant conference rooms replaced picnic tables. Tailored suits replaced comfortable jackets. Yet those around him quickly noticed something had changed. He canceled formal dinners that no longer interested him. He shortened conversations that once consumed entire evenings. During one meeting, an advisor presented plans for another luxury property acquisition, expecting the usual decisive response. Instead, Gabriel quietly asked a different question. How many families work there? The room fell silent. It was the first time anyone had heard him begin with people instead of numbers. The question surprised even Gabriel himself. One rainy afternoon, Alicia finished work and boarded her usual bus home. As she stepped off near her apartment, she noticed several volunteers setting up folding tables outside the neighborhood community center. A handwritten sign announced a weekend food drive for local families. Without thinking twice, she walked over and asked if they needed another pair of hands. For the next several hours, she sorted canned goods, packed grocery boxes, and greeted elderly neighbors with the same gentle kindness that had always defined her. She never realized someone was quietly watching from across the street. Inside a parked sedan, Gabriel observed the scene through rain-speckled windows. He had come only intending to return something she had accidentally left inside his car after the reunion, a simple scarf folded neatly on the passenger seat. Instead, he watched Alicia spend her entire evening helping complete strangers without expecting recognition or reward. An elderly woman struggled to carry 2 heavy grocery bags toward the parking lot. Before any volunteer could react, Alicia hurried over with an umbrella, smiling as though helping someone was the easiest decision in the world. Gabriel remembered her answer beneath the maple trees. Having everyone I love together at one table. He realized then that Alicia had quietly expanded that table to include anyone who needed a place. He stepped out of the car carrying the forgotten scarf. Alicia looked up in surprise as he approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of laughter, passing traffic, and gentle rainfall filled the silence between them. Gabriel held out the neatly folded scarf. I believe this belongs to you. Alicia accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you. Another volunteer called her name from across the parking lot, asking for help unloading another delivery. She excused herself without hesitation, apologizing that she had to leave the conversation unfinished. Gabriel simply nodded and watched her hurry toward the waiting truck, lifting boxes alongside everyone else despite the steady rain soaking through her jacket. No cameras recorded the moment. No audience applauded. She acted exactly the same whether anyone noticed or not. Standing alone beneath the gray afternoon sky, Gabriel finally understood what had drawn him toward her from the very beginning. It was never the lie that brought them together. It was the quiet truth she lived every single day. For the first time in his life, he found himself wondering whether the greatest achievement a person could pursue was not building influence, but becoming someone whose kindness remained unchanged no matter who happened to be watching. Several weeks passed, and autumn quietly settled over Chicago with cooler mornings and skies that seemed brighter after every rainfall. Life continued moving forward, yet both Alicia Carter and Gabriel Castellano carried something from that brief weekend neither could leave behind. Alicia still worked at the Ashford estate with the same quiet dedication, greeting every co-worker with kindness and treating every task as though it mattered. Gabriel continued leading an organization that depended on his judgment, but those closest to him noticed subtle changes. He spent more time supporting neighborhood charities without attaching his name to the donations. He quietly funded community programs that provided meals and job training for working families. Whenever anyone praised his generosity, he simply redirected the credit toward the volunteers who did the real work. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Alicia received an invitation from the neighborhood community center asking volunteers to attend the opening of a newly renovated family resource building. Curious, she arrived wearing the same simple blue coat she wore to work, expecting nothing more than another day of helping organize supplies. Instead, she found a bright, welcoming space, filled with books for children, classrooms for evening education, and a warm kitchen where local families could gather. A small bronze plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to the quiet strength of ordinary people who choose kindness every day." No company logo appeared beneath the inscription. No wealthy donor claimed recognition. Alicia smiled, believing the anonymous benefactor would probably never know how many lives would be touched inside those walls. As guests slowly filled the room, she turned and unexpectedly saw Gabriel standing near one of the windows, dressed simply in a navy sweater instead of one of his tailored business suits. There were no assistants surrounding him, no waiting executives, and no luxury vehicles drawing attention outside. For the first time since the hotel meeting, they stood together without secrets separating them. Gabriel walked toward her carrying a small wooden picture frame wrapped in plain brown paper. "I have been meaning to give this back," he said quietly. Alicia looked puzzled as she accepted the package. Inside the frame rested the same two $100 bills she had once handed him outside the neighborhood coffee shop. Beneath them, engraved on a small brass plate, were the words, "The best investment I ever made." Alicia looked up, unable to speak. Gabriel smiled gently. "Not because of the money," he said. "Because those $200 bought me something I had forgotten was possible. They bought me a weekend where no one cared about my title. They reminded me what honesty, family, and dignity feel like." Tears filled Alicia's eyes as she carefully held the frame against her chest. "I thought I hired someone to help me tell a lie," she whispered. Gabriel shook his head softly. "Instead, you helped me rediscover the truth about the person I wanted to become." They stood in comfortable silence while children laughed in the next room and volunteers arranged fresh flowers on nearby tables. Nothing about the moment felt extraordinary to anyone passing by. Yet for both of them, it marked the beginning of something no agreement could have created and no amount of money could have purchased. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Alicia reached for Gabriel's hand with the same quiet confidence she had shown during that family photograph weeks earlier. This time neither of them questioned whether they belonged in each other's world. They simply chose to build a new one together, proving that genuine respect begins long before love, and that the greatest transformations often start with the smallest acts of trust. And on that quiet autumn afternoon, the world remembered what dignity truly looks like.